The break. Is love expensive in Nigeria? Valentine's Day is over, isn't it? But my guest is joining me right here. Is the lead economist at SPM Professionals. Welcome, Paul. Welcome back to Abuja. The last time I spoke to you, we were in Lagos. We were speaking on Skype. So, welcome your real self.
Thank you
because
so very
technology
much
has made everything, you know, a bit easy.
Yes.
Okay.
It has collapsed space and distance.
And distance. Let's talk a bit about what we were seeing. The reports that my team put together. Is love expensive in Nigeria? I heard the guy talking about agape love. I was like, is there agape love without money? You know, in these days, agape love. What do you think?
Yeah, well, when you talk about love, incidentally, we conducted a research in our organization for Valentine to see how much people want to spend.
Yeah.
And on the average, what people in love or people that would love to be loved said is that 5,000 to 6,000 naira worth of gift is what they were willing to spend. So that now depends on what will 5,000 or 6,000 mean to your income. So for people who are earning 30,000 and below, what is 5,000? That would be a low proportion of their income, by the way. But for someone who earns 200,000, that may be a smaller proportion of his income. So whether love is expensive or not is a function of the person that is loving.
It's a function of the cadre you fall into.
Exactly. So
because
you
if you're like in
that.
the earning bracket of 50K, spending 5,000 to 6,000 naira is 5,000 to 6,000 naira.
It's about 10%
of your income. So that's a lot.
It's a lot.
So the next question is, how much are you willing to give for love?
Exactly, which is one of the questions we asked. How much are you willing to give for love?
Oh, really?
Yes, about 60.
I didn't know you conducted a research.
We did. It was a poll. We had I think it's online, and a lot of people are actually willing to give. The funniest thing is, most male respondents were not even expecting female. Meanwhile, a lot of female respondents were expecting a lot from their families, and particularly male respondents, to give them things.
Okay, let's go to the topic of the day, which is very, very essential. In fact, I've been reading back and forth, Africa Development Bank, World Bank, and I know as someone that watches the space, you would have also been seeing that. Africa's debt on the rise, tension among lenders, World Bank, IMF, Akiwumi Additionals, AfDB. Why? What do you think? Yeah,
there are three reasons why there should be tension. When you take African country with close to 150% increase in debt, one would be worried. One would be worried because we might say that truly Africa's debt is not as high when it comes to GDP to debt. It's not as high as when you compare that with some other continents. When that's comparing some African countries, lead African countries in debt to some others. For instance, when you select 6 countries, Angola, Cameroon, Nigeria, South Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, and one other country and Rwanda, I beg your pardon. When you put these countries together, what you observe is that Nigeria shared 43% of increase in debt, followed by Angola, 22%, and some other countries, they share the rest, which form bulk of African debt, collected from different international organizations, from Africa Development Bank, of course, the World Bank and IMF, and so many other private debt collection. Of course, I'm talking about public debt here, and also from locally sourced debt. The issue here is, when international community begins to be worried about African debt, there are a number of things we need to consider. 3 of them. Number 1, ability to repay, which is the reality. So World Bank might have given X amount to some countries, and they see that maybe these loans or this facility are not performing, and African Development Bank is giving the same. And you see, information is so open and available for people to read. So if you keep giving facility without these countries spending most of these loans or debts they are collecting, they are not spending it on things that will help them to repay back, it might eventually lead to what we call the kiss of death. Now, the kiss of death is very essential. When death kisses countries on forehead, you can ask Greece what happened. After he embraced, not just kiss, Greece actually hugged death, and it was running up and down to know how to come out of it. It was trying at some point that would be excommunicated from the European Union in the middle of crisis. So this is it. Most African countries' GDP to debt to GDP, like Nigerian as a country, I've argued, is not up to threshold level. Threshold level, you need to agree, is it 30%? which DMO is talking about, is it up to 55%, which Ministry of Finance is talking about. So when you look at most African countries, they are even within boundary. But you know what? Economists have what we call necessary condition and sufficient condition, which is now the argument of World Bank. You see, necessary condition is that point where for you to accept facility at all, you must merit some condition. So we have merited the condition, some African countries. But you know where the sufficient condition, like two other conditions that we need to consider, which is what is the ability to pay back? What is the ability to pay back? Now I tell you, in MTEF that government passed in 2019, it revealed that our 2018 January to December window, Nigeria spent 55, I'm talking about federal government now, 55 kobo of every 1 naira to service debt. 55 kobo of every 1 naira, more than half to service debt. But when you look at when project proposal was submitted, no, I'm comparing to revenue. When project proposal was submitted, it was less than 40%. But you know the truth, of all we said we were going to generate in revenue, we were unable to generate them. It, yes. So because we were unable to generate it, we now increase the proportion of debt to GDP. Which is similar to what other African countries also experience. And that is why the world is a bit concerned about what is going on in Africa. You know the last part and the most important part, which everybody beyond World Bank or even IMF and every other country should be concerned about. It is you borrow wisely. It's a good debt. When your rate of debt is lower than your rate of GDP, then it's a good debt. But it's a horrible debt when your rate of borrowing it is faster than rate of GDP for our country. But for our country, debt to GDP ratio is not worrisome. It's different from rate of borrowing. This is the third condition. Okay. The rate at which you borrow. Not GDP, to your GDP growth rate. It's different from debt to GDP. They are two different things. So for Nigeria, rate of borrowing is 15%. GDP is 2.28%. So we borrow too quickly. We borrow exactly, and that even watch what World Bank is saying. I get you. It's borrowing too quickly. I get you, Paul. I think you need a high five for this analysis right now. You know, yes, you just brought up something. The rate of borrowing. Exactly. Where did you get that from? You know, the rate of borrowing is higher. It's higher than the rate at GDP. The economic growth. So the implication, which of course needs to now be, we need to have conversation about is, we are borrowing this money. On what are we spending them? If they are having impact on the economy truly, it should also boost economic growth. The truth is that governments of countries, truly, particularly African countries, want their economy to grow. I have not seen one government, whether military or civilian, that will say I'm in government because I don't want my people to grow. No, but the question is, it could be mouth. We want to grow, but are you taking the actions? Are you taking necessary? So let's quickly take a break. When we come back, I would continue to chat with Paul. Let's quickly take a break. Don't forget that you can join us, join the conversation. Follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on all social media platforms. Drop your comment about what we're talking right now. Paul just illuminated my mind. The rate of borrowing is faster than the GDP growth rate. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. In case you're just joining us, we're still talking. The conversation is still on about Africa's rising debt profile. World Bank, IMF, African Development Bank, talking here, there. This is what it is. African Development Bank says no. And Paul Alaje, the lead economist
at SPM Professionals, still with me. Before the break, he did say something, which is the rate of borrowing is faster than the rate at which GDP grows, which is very, 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 very illuminating, you know, because analysts at a level like, okay, debt to GDP ratio, you know, is okay. If you take a look at it, we're still below, I think around 20%, we're still less than 40%, which is the threshold. Other even developed nations, there are some debt to GDP is about 150%, China, Japan, and all of them. But the question is not even debt to GDP for us. It's about debt to revenue service. Now, which you said, it's about the way our economy is growing. Compared to what we are borrowing. Our borrowing rate is faster. And the thing which you also you know, expanded my mind on now is that the rate at which we are borrowing is faster. But that rate is not even showing in what we are borrowing for.
And the evidence for that is what CBN released, National Bureau of Statistics have released. We watch what is happening. When you borrow, it is assumed that you borrow into capital, not borrow into recurrent.
Consumption.
Or even when you borrow into capital, from the report CBN shared about CBN Statistical Bulletin 2018-2019, what you have seen is that capital investment in Nigeria actually reduced, both private and public, and public investment. Why? Even investment into Nigeria from National Bureau of Statistics also reduced, November report. Why have we had such reduction? If truly we have borrowed. So borrowing will impact our foreign reserve because most of those foreign borrowings are coming in hard currency. So it's going to boost foreign reserve. But foreign reserve is vague. You know why? If you borrow 1 trillion naira, 1 trillion naira will first eat our foreign reserve. It will show us that we now have more foreign currency in our votes. So it will show foreign reserve as. So whether the money came as earnings or it came as borrowings, what is important is that foreign currency is now more available in our country. So, and it will reflect. But you know the truth, the important thing is, as this translated to investment. Now, how it will translate to investment will be, what proportion of public asset has increased in terms of investment or spendings? We see that. Then what has happened to private investment? Because when contracts are issued out, is now we go into private investments. Private sector will hand profit and put it maybe with bank by some asset, public asset and by private assets as the case may be. But when you look at cumulative assets that we have, it has reduced and our borrowing is increasing. Then there is a major gap which we all need to audit. We need to audit so that the word of Mr. President saying it will create more jobs, it will reduce poverty and so on and so forth. The major window we have been looking at, particularly when you consider our fiscal shortfall, talking about fiscal deficit, and we have been covering this deficit with debt and debt over time, which of course a lot of states are also doing. The question is, most of all of these, if you are not defining economic principle, should translate to growth, not just at federal level, but at state level. But when you see that the intermediary is missing, which means most of this money borrowed is not translating to investment, it will take magic to translate to growth. But because investment is reducing, and it's not, you know, it's even falling, it's negative. GDP is still 2.28, so it's still growing. But investment is even negative. So when you have negative investment, compare with when you have increasing positive, almost 15%, the increase in borrowing, that's borrowing growth rate, and you have negative investment, and so there is a lot of mismatch. Is it policy? Is it regulatory policy? What exactly could be responsible for the environment? CBN has also reduced, CBN MPC has also reduced, increased CRR, and about 3, 4, 6 months ago, reduced rates from 14% to 13.5%.
That was last year, January.
Last year, okay. Will this have effect on investment for Nigeria?
You know,
and some other African countries, as the case may be.
David Malpass, who is the World Bank president, also mentioned that he was really so keen on this, and he said that the borrowing to African countries by the African Development Bank lacked transparency. Perhaps, are you concerned about that? And with what you said, if the rate of borrowing is high, and yet we are not seeing fiscal infrastructure and capital reforms, let me put it that way, capital infrastructure reforms in Africa. So where's the gap? There's a gap. Money has been borrowed. The projects are not that so many to show. So is it about transparency, just like David Malthus
Yeah,
said.
well, one, I want to doubt the integrity of African Development Bank because it's an institution over the years that have proven herself as an institution that could be trusted. My worry will be with the recipients of most of these funds. Now, African Development Bank may need to do more to audit fund and follow funds that is given in form of loans. So it's simple. When you give a country and says it wants to use facility to develop some projects, an African Development Bank might have taken the document and so on and so forth. Some of them may be published, some may not be published. Of course, African Development Bank is saying we published all our reports to show who collected funds and so on and so forth.
And they did say that World Bank borrows more to Africa than even Africa.
Yes. But if you see, World Bank is even lending with a lot of caution now because of ability to repay, which is the first thing in sufficient condition, ability to repay. How will African country pay back their debts, their loans? Not just to international community, even to China, which comes in form of projects. So we have a lot in our hands. So for me, I think even though African Development Bank is still giving some of these facilities to Africans, of course, and it's responsible for development of African continent. So you would expect African Development Bank to come out boldly to say, we are lending, this is our core mandate, to lend to African countries. But are these money spent on the projects? Are they spent on developing Africa truly? Are African leaders not playing foul play in between the line? And if African Development Bank keeps quiet about it, then it would mean that it is it has some level of agreement with what is going, even if that may not be very correct. That is why African Development Bank must publish not just how much was given, not just when it was given. There must be specific projects and audit in the last 5 years, in the last 10 years.
But they even do that, leading me to the next question. If Africa is facing a potential calamity with the debt situation and pretending that nothing is happening.
The truth is that Africa is.
Do you understand what I'm saying? On the part of even multilateral institutions, and China is another ball game.
Yes, even beyond multilateral institution, even internal debts that Africa has is crowding out employment. And that is why you go to many African countries, unemployment rate is high in many African countries. Nigeria is where we live, where we both live. What we have here is 23.1%, not of the 201 million people, no, but of about 100 million people, which is the labor force. So it's not on the entire population. Unemployment is a reality, and it's high, not just in Nigeria, even in some other African countries that we need to talk about. So if truly most of these funds, not just for African Development Bank, but from IMF, for World Bank, are trickling down to the people. Mark you, Africa still has a lot of rural community, and we have started seeing unprepared acceptance of rural life due to migration in urban centers. Urban centers don't have enough roads to accommodate more people. They don't have enough power supply, which is the reality of most places in Africa. They don't have enough food. They don't have enough jobs, but people want to search for greener pasture, living from one hand to another, which is now compounding to a lot more problems that Africa had. So for me, is money really the problem of Africa? Do we need to still give more money to Africa?
Is money the problem?
No. So I'll tell you, but do we still need to give? For me, it's not just money. Money is one of the issues, but money is not the key issue. The key issue Africa should solve is leadership and ability to combine factors of production to ensure the people are led from current economic penury and poverty to economic prosperity. And for me, Africa has accepted a major lie from the rest of the world, which China accepted in the 18th century, United Kingdom accepted it in the 15th century, America accepted it in the 14th century. Most countries, and in fact continents, have accepted this lie. What is the lie? You are dark, you are black, you are supposed to be farming for the rest of us. Now, this is what happened. When you farm, without them, who will be the secondary recipient, support you using modern technology for you to farm. So our people still go to nearby farms even within FCT. This is the capital of Nigeria, okay? And go to Lagos, commercial capital. Go to the suburb. You still see a lot of people with their hoes and cutlasses farming. You know the challenge you have when output comes, they are going to have little or no profit. So poverty will be recycled. But the output of of those people, we fund prosperity for those who will buy
Yes,
from us,
the
from our
middlemen and
cocoa,
co.
etc.,
Yeah.
even our crude oil. We think we have money in our crude oil. How come many people around Niger Delta region see appears poor? According to World Bank report, average income in Niger Delta is less than $1. Average income is less than $1 a day. Well, meanwhile, for you to be rich, you need $1.90, as the case may be, or even $2.
Adequate,
so,
yes.
as the case may be. So, but people are still poor. It is because Africa likes primary production. I mean, primary economy. And what is primary economy?
Is it that we like? Is it that we like it, or is something now that, just like you said, which I agree with you in terms of leadership, in terms of, and which I say on the show all the time, we shouldn't be satisfied with primary production. The president said, produce what you eat what you produce. Fantastic idea. But we should go beyond eating, because like I say on the show sometimes, man has gone beyond the 3 basic needs of life, which I was taught when I was in primary school or so. Food, clothing, and shelter. It's gone beyond that. There's everything. The big companies right now in the world are not really hard. Yes. Core infrastructure companies. You have the likes of Facebook and co. You just be somewhere, just sitting down here, you're controlling billions of dollars. So we should go beyond that primary thing you're talking about. But let me bring you back. Let's take that card that I saw earlier about what Akinwumi Adesina said on his Twitter handle. Can we just take it quickly so that I can see what he said? He did say that there is a new Africa. He said the old Africa is gone. There is a confident Africa now. There is a strong Africa, that Africa will thrive. Do we have that? Yes, let's quickly take it on the screen. That's it. Against all odds, that's his tweet, the AfDB's president. Against all odds, Africa will thrive. There is a new Africa, a resurgent Africa, a more confident Africa. The old is gone. The new is here. Very optimistic. Okay, he's still saying African Development Bank is Africa's trusted development finance institution of choice. We think Africa, know Africa, work for Africa, and have only one mission: accelerate the development of Africa. We are trusted because we earned Africa's trust. We are Africa's bank. In fact, reading that, I'm very optimistic. I'm proud to be African. He gives you, that's Akinwumi Adesina. Yes. But you see that aura of positivity, that aura of optimism.
I wish you were African president, an African Development Bank president. Maybe some of the policy direction will go along his tweet. What you have is that you have a lot of brilliant people managing institutions, but when it comes to politics, that drives economy. We don't have these people there. The best we appoint them to do is administrative positions, and when you have them,
their impact will not be minimal.
It will be very minimal. So I respect Mr. Dr. Akinwumi Adesina. I respect. It's one of the African stars, one of the persons I have so much regard, so much respect for in Africa. But he would agree with me that poverty is a reality in Africa, hunger is a reality in Africa, and that when you look at insurgency in Africa, it's on the rise. Debt is a major issue in Africa. Now, I am not saying it can solve all the problems, but I am saying that we need to put our best forward, from Angola to Burundi to South Africa to Nigeria to Cameroon, Angola, among other African countries, even in Egypt. We need to put our best forward and see more collaboration. I am hoping the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, of course, its execution will start. You know what that will do for countries that are laid back, countries that have refused to provide their own power supply, countries that have refused to build institutions, countries that have refused to build infrastructure. There will be infrastructure. The best of the brains of those countries will go to countries that are prepared, countries that are ready, countries that are working on educating their people, countries that are providing health, countries that have good policies, countries that are not religious in their thinking or in making policy. Those are places, maybe those are the places Mr. Akinwumi is talking about new Africa. But those that want to remain with old Africa, which he has left, which African Development Bank has left, they will have their fingers to bite in pains in the coming period.
Are there other options of financing for Africa aside China, which we talked about? Because Africa has a weak economic balance sheet, so to speak. Are there other options for finance? If we say don't go to China, where should they go to? Now, let me phrase it this way. Where should they go to, or what should they do?
For me, I will be looking at having public-private partnership across Africa, and also Africa exchanging idea and exchanging investment rather than us waiting for countries outside. Forbes told us that Africa is not lacking rich people. In Nigeria alone, you see that 4 Nigerians met 4 billionaires. What that means is that Nigeria's actually created well. And you look at the life of these people, most major businesses, if not all, are in Nigeria. So the same, not just Nigeria. Remember that the second richest person is not in Nigeria, is a South African. And so many other people who are in South Africa. In what can these people invest? Why they would thrive abroad if they would have been better if they were in some other countries because of policy environment, because of institution. I'll give you an example. A particular town shares borders between America and Mexico. On the half, it was divided into halves. The half that falls into America, there is a lot of people there are prospering, they are wealthy, but the other half are poor. They have the same culture, they dance to the same music, they do everything alike. If they want to greet you, it's the same pattern. They eat the same food. But the prosperity, the God of prosperity smile on those that are on the American side, and God of penury laughs at those on the other side. Why? Because of government presence, because of policy framework, because of institution and structure. For me, what Africans should do, no matter the loan you attract, if you have a robber as a staff in your organization and you borrow money from bank and it must pass through the hand of that staff who happens to be a robber, the truth is that the organization will soon fold up.
Now, you made mention earlier that money is not Africa's problem. Do you think there are reforms that Africa should undertake that would loosen money sources or monetary sources? That's the A question, because I think we have 5 minutes to the end of the program. That's the A part. The B part of it is, what do you think will shake Africa's leaders from their slumber? Because you look at what the World Bank and IMF have said, those are institutions that are working and established in developed economies. David Malpass, before he became president, was criticizing World Bank, for example. I think his own demeanor and his own aura towards the management of World Bank is quite different. But we're talking about leadership. So what do you think will shake Africa's leaders from the slumber? Because this is really deep sleep. I really don't know what African leaders are doing. You see some of the leaders have been there for 25, 30, 38, 40, perhaps some going for third term and all of that, So 2 questions.
I'll give you instance of a country. That country was known for fake products in the 40s and 60s. Now, the president, the leader of that country has been there for a while. In fact, there's another China. Now, what happened in China? The leader knew the truth, and he was willing to defend it because he wants to make legacy. He does not just want to remain in power. He wants to make a name. Today, people talk about Chinese economy as one of the major competitive economy in the world. Watch this. Coronavirus is taking major turn on Chinese economy, but Chinese economy's growth is still higher than that of Nigeria without the disease. So, but Chinese economy has more population than Nigeria, and so on and so forth, which means you will estimate the strength of Chinese economy even in the face of crisis. And it still has growth, of course. It's a reducing growth now for obvious reasons, but the growth is still high. Why? Because leadership understood that what we attract more people to them, it is not primary product and not just secondary that they do because it is manufacturing for the entire globe. Not just that. It is not manufacturing itself that matters. It is getting your people engaged, let them be productive, and create rich people. Now, riches and wealth is not what we should criminalize, but we should go after those who are stealing from the poor in order to enrich themselves. Fantastic work. That's what our agencies of government are doing to ensure that we reduce that. More importantly is, are we able to build institutions? Are we able to build structures and systems that will encourage further production in our country, and also for everybody to actually obey what the policy says? Now, when you say that people need to cut down their income, the first thing you hear average Nigerians say that, oh, let all our senators cut their income, let all this, not knowing that the law actually stipulates what they will earn. For us to change that, we first need to change the law. If you don't change the law, they will keep earning it. So what does the law say? We need to check our laws. And lawyers and those activists, human rights, etc., may need to help Nigeria in partnership with government perhaps of today or future government, to see how we can make the best of us, not just in Nigeria, and even the rest of Africa. Today, when you talk of one of the African countries people want to visit, is Rwanda. Smaller population, smaller economy, but better growth rate. Why? Because Paul Kagame realized that he needs to prune his institution and
but
make
some
them
people
more.
are also against Paul Kagame in terms of his style of leadership, though you have about 60% of parliamentarians as women in Rwanda, and they have some kind of reform. But some people will also criticize the style of leadership in the sense that it's so hard-fisted, it doesn't like opposition and all of that.
So what happens to Chinese economy? Similar to that of Rwanda. But what happens to the growth? President Trump, what happens to his policy? Similar to that, but what happens to growth? He brought, he's raining jobs for people in America compared to what we had. I respect President Obama. He's one of the greatest leaders I've ever seen in the world. He speaks really fine. He has good intention for the world. We may not say exactly the same for President Trump, but economy under President Trump is just better than
under
that.
President Trump, the recovery started when Obama was there.
I agree.
He's been a train.
I agree with.
He's been there for like
See, I agree
10
with
years
the
now, which Trump
recoveries,
also
but
came
I'm
into.
talking of the rate of growth now. The rate of growth now is more than what we've had in the
But some
recent
people also
history.
criticize the U.S. Job rate in terms of wage growth is not also going higher. But some will also say, okay, black people, that's the blacks have had higher growth rate. That's another topic that, Paul, you are taking me to. We're not discussing the biggest economy today. The day I'll discuss it, we'll go into that.
No
but
problems.
okay, I think we just have to go now. We just have to go. We just have to go. 10 seconds. What do we do in Nigeria?
Well, I don't know. We can't see what we do in Nigeria in 10
Our
seconds.
debt rates,
Yes.
debt profile, 27 trillion.
I think we should repeat what is going on currently on Lagos Apapa Expressway, where we have private investment constructing road. You will not believe that it's Nigerian road they are constructing. You would think it's a decking of 25-story building that we are building. It's just the road. It is because it is private investment and we affect directly. Yes. So if you can repeat that for some other roads, particularly major roads, that's what I can say in 10 seconds.
It's for private sector to come into it because there is a policy to that. I think the road infrastructure, the executive order 007.
We need to know how popular that order
is. All right. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you so much
coming to the show.
me.
All right, that's the much we can take on today's edition of the program. I hope you've enjoyed our package. In case you did not, please just forgive us. Watch us again